All right. Excuse me while I just readjust. I do not like that went to that extreme. But, okay. So, I also am going to change colors so that we know that we're now talking about a different thing. So, now we're going to talk about the we're going to talk about the sociological factors. And yeah, I could, and this is where I say this with as much respect as I can. I can talk about the psychology and the sociology of juvenile delinquency and the theories in like 5 minutes, but that would be going way too quickly over everything. So I'm slowing it down, talking briefly on some of these points because they're important, but there's a lot more to this. But right off the bat, just trying to re-emphasize something that we tend to not get into, but most delinquents are indigent and desperate, not calculating or evil. Long story short, most juvenile delinquents aren't like malintent. They're not intending to hurt people because they want to. It tends to be that they are desperate and looking for something. That's not to say there isn't those that are doing it for just malintent, but it's important to note that, there's more to it. And so there are a decent list of social factors. So and I'm going to do broad coverage of this. So I'm not going to really dive into it. The textbook does a decent job talking about them. So I'm going to list them here, touch very briefly on them, but you can read more if you would be like to. So some social factors of delinquency are interpersonal interactions, we have social conditions, we have my favorite topic, poverty. I don't mean that seriously. I mean that in a sarcastic way. We have racial disparity, also sometimes referred to as systemic racism in regards to this. And so, again, apologies about the coughing. So, interpersonal interactions is the way the individual communicates with family members, peers, school members, professionals, how they interact in a job, anything like that. The way that those interactions between the potential delinquent and every component of their social life, they have an impact on whether or not they're going to commit some kind of delinquent act. Social conditions are these factors. And I know factors are like everywhere. But when we talk about social conditions, we are talking about like crime rates. We're talking about things that are going on in those areas that, because they have this, it leads to this. So, because of the high crime rate and the low police presence, there's an increased potential in this area for delinquency. Therefore, if an individual has not great interpersonal interactions and the social conditions are right, there is a higher chance that they will be a delinquent. Poverty, I talked about in the intro to criminal justice class. The poverty line is a problem, and the way we approach poverty is an issue. And unfortunately, a good number of impoverished individuals and what we would call the working poor, people that do not qualify as part of the poverty line, but they are definitely not well off enough that they don't have to struggle and live paycheck to paycheck. Poverty is an issue in the United States. Not saying it's not an issue anywhere else, but in a place where we talk about freedom, poverty is a real issue. Anyway, unfortunately, the reality is that the lower you are on the poverty scale, there is a likelihood that you will commit some kind of delinquent behavior, often out of necessity. It incentivizes children to commit crime. Now, again, that's not to say that rich individuals don't commit crimes. It's just that necessity for living tends to play a higher role. And of course, because, racial disparity is such a big issue in the United States that, unless you are a white male, you tend to have some kind of issue with some aspect of our system. Yeah, that's a big racial disparity. I'd also argue there's a gender disparity as well, but that's a different issue. But what I'm saying is that social factors of delinquency, unfortunately, if you are born a minority, if you are not born a middle to upper class white male, you tend to have a higher potential to be a delinquent. And it's because of these social issues within different race groups where they are forced into less than stellar living conditions with an unequal access to health care and health in general, as well as food and education. Like, all these things lead to the higher potential for delinquency. It's not that, and this is important to note, it doesn't mean that because of the color of your skin or your race that you are a delinquent. What it means is that because of the way society has placed these individuals of color into these locations, into these situations that they cannot possibly win, that they cannot possibly live, this has led them to have a higher rate of being a delinquent, becoming involved in the criminal justice system. So there's a lot of issues here. That's why I said, like, there's a lot to this. And so our authors mentioned one thing that I do want to bring up, and that is this culture of poverty. And it's from 1966, Oscar Lewis. This is also, if you're familiar with it, it's closely related, but not like the exact same thing. It's connected to this cycle of poverty. The cycle of poverty is, one negative thing or one thing leads to not having enough money, and so you scrimp and save and avoid other things just so you can pay this. But by the time you're able to be done with that, something else has happened because you took from elsewhere. And then when you're born into poverty, you tend to live in poverty and you die in poverty and your family lives in. There is a real issue of this. But the culture of poverty in particular, this is the idea that this is the viewpoint, not that it's true, but the view that low class individuals form a separate culture with their own values and norms, and they tend to conflict with society. These are concepts like cynicism and helplessness, and saying, government institutions aren't helpful. They're not there. They don't work. While, yes, there is that understanding and belief that sometimes the system doesn't work. Just writing it off from the beginning continues this culture of poverty that you can't get out of it, so why try? And that's the sad reality of the culture of poverty, is that because it's so hard to get out of, so many individuals see this as it's not possible. Truly, the cycle of the cycle and the culture of poverty are connected to this idea of hopelessness. So if you are an individual who is currently living in poverty or is part of the working poor, please know that if you fall to hopelessness, then it's won. It's important to not give up hope. Anyway, if you were young and you were not actually a student with us, then maybe this would be a different conversation. Anyway, one issue that comes up with this, and this is an important thing to talk about. Our textbook talks about hollowed out cities and neighborhoods, and this is the idea that the innermost parts of a city is where you have your extremely poor, and as you move outwards, you get to the more rich. Truly, this is partly what Erie looks like at this point in time. We do have a stronger core of the poor and the working poor in the downtown area, as well as on the east and west side in certain pockets. But as you get out to the more rural areas, there tends to be a higher population of richer individuals. Not to say there's not poor in there, but there is this kind of concept that as you work outwards, you get richer rather than the rich being at the center of the town. But this brings up an issue of what we call revitalizing a city, where they take this poor, broken down area and they breathe new life into it. The term that you might be familiar with, I want to make sure I'm spelling it right, gentrified. And this is the idea that you make it look nice, you raise the taxes because people come in, people want to be there, and all of a sudden the people that lived there for so long and had lived there for a long time can't afford to live there. This is something that the black community has experienced quite a lot of in their history. As a white individual, I'm not an expert to talk on this, but historically speaking, predominantly black neighborhoods and things like certain music genres like rock and roll, blues, rap, and hip hop, they become gentrified. They become this commodity for white individuals to come in and move in and claim it as their own. And all of a sudden, the individuals who lived there for the longest time, that is part of their identity, they can't afford that identity anymore. So they lose it. This is part of gentrification. From an purely economic standpoint, it's a good thing because it brings in money to that particular environment. But the bad thing is it does impact the low income. It does impact the impoverished, and that's not okay. So gentrification, if you've heard that term before and you weren't really sure what the heck it means, it really is just revitalizing a part of a town. It's taking a rundown part and putting a new coat of paint on it and getting people to come in and raising the prices. Does it solve problems? Yes. But does it cause other problems? Oh, yes. So, something that we see with these hollowed out cities and gentrification is that Part of the cycle of poverty and the culture of poverty is that some of these individuals worked in manufacturing and in manual labor. And as those jobs went overseas, uh, areas that relied heavily on it saw a dip in employment and in funds. And truly, Erie is an example of this. If you've never really thought about it, Erie is a good example of this. We used to have Hammermill. We used to have GE, which is now Wabtec. And even Wabtec is a different entity altogether. Like, some of the big name manufacturings were in this area and they're not here anymore. And that's impacted our general population. There's issues with this. Um, Part of that is a whole nother stuff, but um, we are seeing a revitalization attempt in Erie, but we need to be cautious and attentive to this gentrification, just as a general note. But as I've said in the Intro to Criminal Justice course, I'm trying to connect what we talk about in the book and in the notes and the lectures to real world things that are related to our area. So Erie County, this is a big thing. And that's important to note. Like, manufacturing was not just Erie City proper, it's the county. A lot of it's not there anymore. This is an issue. But no matter how you look at this, what this all breaks down to, and I'll say if I can find where my mouse is. How this relates to delinquency and everything else is that we are talking about the structural and cultural impact. We are looking at how all these things, how social factors, how the way things are designed, how we have good neighborhoods and bad neighborhoods, and uh, how we have certain businesses in one place and not in another. Like, all these things, as well as the cultures, the individual, like, people that live there, that all plays a role in how delinquency comes about for these groups and in these areas. So, again, just important to kind of go over this stuff. So, our text talks about something, and I'm going to expand it with something that's not written in our textbook, but so in relation to this issue of the hollowed out cities, we have community deterioration, and this is, well, you don't, well, I hope you know, but community deterioration is as it's this idea that as the physical community changes and goes down and becomes less and less effective and engaged, so does the social aspect. And this is directly related to a particular theory. It's my favorite because the easy term for it is broken windows. And again, this is something that's not mentioned in our textbook so far, but I want to bring it up. Broken windows theory is the idea that the idea is that an unkempt home attracts crime. So The idea comes from uh, the idea that if you see broken windows, crime is probably happening there. And so this as a theory is a very kind of self-fulfilling prophecy style where, if the area is not good, then of course, it's going to attract crime. But if you clean it up, does it fix it? Well, not necessarily, but it might prevent or might rather deter crime. And so that's the basics of broken windows theory. But the community deterioration section of this chapter talks about how concentrated poverty, gang involvement, drug use, all these things, like as the deterioration of a particular community goes down, that the social aspects of it goes down, and which increases the chance and potential of delinquency. We have this here, and so I will probably reference it more times throughout the criminal justice courses. But broken windows theory is this idea that if you see a place that looks like it is good for crime, there is a high chance that crime is committed there. And it comes back to this concept of access. Can you access an area? Can you have a safe house? Can you have a getaway? And that's what we have here with this concept of broken windows or a deteriorated building. And so our textbook offers on page, and I'm just going to write it for you all because I'm not going to write out the whole chart. But on page 103, figure 4.3, yes, 4.3, is the cycle of social disorganization. Chart. Oops. And so the social disorganization chart is how we go from just at the beginning a normal societal community, social environment, and how different parts begin to break it down. So it starts with the first stage of being poverty, and then it starts to break down with like lack of social control, no real good organizations like a school, things like that, and then it goes down. It just shows you the breakdown, and like I said, I don't need to write it out for you because I think that you are adult enough to read through the chapter and see that figure. I'm even giving you the page and where what it is. And so with this idea of society overseeing and being involved and having a direct impact on delinquency as well as environment, there is this idea, and this is what I'm going to end with for this lecture part. Collective efficacy. And so collective efficacy is really just that there's a mutual trust and willingness to work together among the community to prevent this kind of thing. It's this, you hold each other accountable. So, and this is where we see this in the juvenile system, when neighborhood kids see that the people in their community actually care and, they're making an effort, even if the kids think some of it is stupid, if they see that it is actually like people working together and not being, oh, well, I'm here and that person's there, this idea that you work together will actually be modeled by them. And it shows that, they tend to be less engaged in delinquent behavior. And of course, the earlier you have this, the better. But that's what collective efficacy is, that everyone in a group holds each other accountable, and it's an agreement that we all are going to work for the betterment of our people. All right. Uh, I'm just looking at how many parts we still have to cover. Yeah. Next time we'll talk a little bit about strain theory and a couple other pieces. So hang in there. Like I said, I know these are there's a lot of lecture, but hopefully breaking this up is helpful. So anyway, I will see you all soon.